Good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are joining us here from. Welcome, everybody, to Westwood's webinar, where we will be exploring the realistic opportunity or sort of navigating the expectations, really, for Iberian hydrogen here today. So it's great to see so many of you could join us this afternoon. Yes. So just for those of you that haven't heard of us before, those of you who are coming across us for the first time, Westwood is a specialist market intelligence provider. We've historically covered upstream oil and gas on the E&P side of things, on supply chain services, but we have also been developing the new energies side of the business over the last 3 or 4 years. So our selected specialisms in this area include climate and emissions, offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, and of course, hydrogen. So those of you who may have joined our last webinar in February know that we launched our offering in that month. So earlier this year, initially covering, so our offering initially covering Northwest Europe, which is designed to allow you to stay on top of the evolving hydrogen market, its opportunities, and assess individual projects and the project pipelines for the markets that we cover. This offering also includes our unique project certainty feature, which we'll be featuring throughout the presentation. We'll touch on that more later, but I do want to highlight the fact that as part of this webinar, I also wanted to officially launch the fact that we're expanding beyond Northwest Europe into a fully European offering. Most recently, we've added Spain and Portugal to our coverage, hence the focus of our webinar today. So I did first want to quickly introduce ourselves. Arthur, thanks. Yeah, turn the camera on. So I'm Jun Sasamura. I'm a senior hydrogen analyst here at Westwood, and I've been leading the development and management of our hydrogen offering. And I'm joined by Arthur James this afternoon, who is an analyst in our team with a particular focus on hydrogen as well. So quickly, just an agenda for today. The first 3 parts will be focused on content. So obviously exploring the opportunities for Iberian hydrogen, the progress that we are seeing in the project pipeline, the key challenges for the Iberian Peninsula, and finally moving to the second part, which, if you would like to join us, is covering a deeper dive into the hydrogen offering in our research capabilities, but also in our consulting capabilities, and we will do a short live demonstration of the product as well towards the end. So why are we discussing Iberian hydrogen today? Well, it is central to the European hydrogen narrative. Now, the Iberian Peninsula holds a unique position within the region, offering significant potential to drive the development of the renewable hydrogen market in Europe. Both Spain and Portugal have abundant renewable potential, especially in solar and onshore wind, and these countries see renewable hydrogen as a key solution to achieving decarbonization within their economies. Now, this does raise some key questions. Things like, how much of a role is hydrogen actually going to play, and how do their ambitions compare to other major European markets? So if we look at the data on the left-hand side of the slide, where we compare hydrogen production capacity targets versus greenhouse gas emissions from last year for these select countries, we can identify some clear takeaways for Iberia relative to the other major European markets. So Spain's ambition is very evidently clear. They're leading Europe with a 2030 electrolyzer target of capacity of just over 7.3 gigawatts in lower heating value, with the closest competitor in Germany, as you can see on the right-hand side, with a target of 6.6 gigawatts. While Germany is an industrial powerhouse planning to use hydrogen across sectors like power, industry, and steel, it's evident, given the balance between the two metrics, that they're also pursuing other decarbonization pathways, given its high emissions relative to their hydrogen targets. So this suggests that Germany, given its balance of emissions, and targets, as I've said, may become a net importer, potentially, of renewable fuels, including hydrogen. Moving to Portugal, towards the bottom left, I can see that Portugal has a low greenhouse gas. It is a low greenhouse gas emitting country. Its hydrogen production capacity target is notably high, though, comparable to markets like France. Spain and Portugal, their high hydrogen targets relative to their current emissions, are choosing hydrogen as a preferred pathway to decarbonization, and therefore may be indicating their position as a potential exporter in the future. Now, this export potential, sort of highlighted on the right-hand side of the slide here, is reinforced by various infrastructure projects in development, linking the Iberian Peninsula to key demand centers in Northwest Europe. Germany has already indicated that it may need to import up to 70% of its hydrogen, or expected hydrogen demand, and the Netherlands is also positioning itself as a major entry point for hydrogen into the region, with projects already underway that aim to import hydrogen derivatives by ship from Spain and Portugal. So we can see the strong commitment both Spain and Portugal have to hydrogen development when we look at their ambitious 2030 electrolyzer capacity targets, which have recently been updated in draft plans. Portugal raised its target to 3.6 gigawatts, while Spain aims for an impressive 7.3 gigawatts. This level of ambition extends to their renewable electricity goals as well. Currently, Portugal's grid is already approaching 75% renewables on average, and is on track to reach a revised target of 93% renewable electricity by 2030. Also, by that year, Portugal aims to install 20.8 gigawatts of solar, nearly double its wind target of 10.4 gigawatts. And additionally, 8.6 gigawatts of renewable electricity capacity will be dedicated specifically for hydrogen production projects, according to its recent climate and energy plan update. So a key advantage for Portugal is really that its hydrogen projects will be exempt from the additionality clause in the EU's RED II Delegated Act, which mandates additional renewable capacity unless the grid is over 90% renewable. Now, given Portugal's trajectory and target, this exemption will hope to accelerate hydrogen development in the country. Moving to Spain, the government has set a target to install 76 gigawatts of solar by 2030, which would make it the largest source of electricity in the country by this date. While Spain's renewable electricity target of 74% by 2030 doesn't trigger the same additionality exemptions as would in Portugal, its vast solar resources potentially provides access to cheap renewable electricity needed for lower electrolytic hydrogen production costs. Clear benefit there. So both Spanish and Portuguese project developers have demonstrated their ability to capitalize on the advantages that I've mentioned, where we saw in their first European Hydrogen Bank auction, where we saw project developers show the ability to design projects that were deemed to be economically viable despite receiving relatively low subsidy support. Finally, both countries are supporting the transition from existing gray hydrogen to the use of renewable hydrogen. Spain, for instance, as you can see, has set a national target for 74% of its industrial hydrogen to be RFNBO compliant by 2030. RFNBO, of course, referring to the EU's definition of renewable fuels of non-biological origin, which includes renewable hydrogen. I'm now going to pass to Arthur, who will take you through what is happening in the project pipeline.
Thank you, Jin. Now, let's look at how projects are progressing in Iberia. So between Spain and Portugal, we track 16.7 gigawatts worth in lower heating value of projects that are due to be online by 2030, which is the largest pipeline in Europe. However, only 1% of these projects have passed FID, and only a further 14% are categorized as probable to reach FID according to Westwood's project certainty criteria. As we can see, this region is faring no better than many of the other major European nations when it comes to the progress of their hydrogen projects. This may be surprising, as with the current narrative surrounding Iberia's hydrogen projects, particularly considering the results of the first European Hydrogen Bank auction, where over 80% of the funding was awarded to projects in either Portugal or Spain. This may be surprising to see this relative lack of progress. So clearly, when it comes to ambition, as Jin has just mentioned, Iberia is leading the way, with Spain having the highest 2030 target of any European nation, and the region having over 16 gigawatts of projects in development by the same year. But now taking a closer look at each country, we see that Spain provides the majority of this capacity and has the largest pipeline in Europe. Both countries are expected to exceed their original 2030 targets, which were set in 2020, and have significantly raised them, as Jim mentioned in the previous slide. As we can see on the graph, Spain should meet their draft 2030 target if most of these projects come online in their respective timelines. On the other hand, Portugal is relying on a small number of projects. We track 13 in our database, and is currently below their draft 2030 target. They will need a few more projects to be announced and to come to fruition in order to meet their target. Looking across and comparing to other European countries, we see that the Netherlands has the most robust pipeline, with the highest proportion of probable projects at 30% and the lowest proportion of risk projects at 9%. I should say that most of this probable capacity is driven by one very large project, Nort H2 Phase 1, which is due to come online in 2030. And if delayed by a year or more, this could change the outlook of the country significantly. Just to note as well, quickly, the UK here is seen lagging behind, but this graph only includes electrolytic projects and their electrolytic target, and no CCS-enabled projects, which is where the UK scores very highly. Next slide, please, Jim. Now let's take a look at where projects are located and who is developing these projects. From the projects shown here on the map, around 80% of the region's capacity is represented. As we've seen from the slide before, there are a number of larger scale projects in Spain over Portugal. These projects, as perhaps expected, are located in some of Spain's largest industrial zones, where they can benefit from shared infrastructure and the proposed Spanish hydrogen backbone, which will connect many of these clusters, like Huelva, Puerto Llano, and also Asturias. Similarly, in Portugal, developers are seeking to develop projects where there is the possibility of shared infrastructure or where there is existing grey hydrogen demand, such as in Sines and in Nazaire. As we look across at the largest developers of hydrogen projects in the two countries, we can see many of the region's biggest developers are also the operators of the region's major refineries, such as Cepsa, Repsol, and Galp. We can also see some of the region's largest renewable energy providers, such as Iberdrola. The largest developer we can see here is Hive Energy, who have announced just one project near Cartagena by 2030 called Albamed, and this will produce ammonia. DH2 Energy was the largest developer with their High Deal España project. However, this was significantly scaled back from the originally announced 7.4 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity due to their reassessment of the hydrogen market. This is a theme that Jörn will touch on later. Next slide, please. Here we can see the target sectors for Iberian hydrogen, and the large majority of projects across Iberia are targeting industrial decarbonisation. Over 90, just about 91% in Spain and 83% in Portugal. By industrial decarbonisation, this covers the sectors of chemicals, industry, refining, steel, and cement. This may come as a surprise, as there has been a narrative of Spain and Portugal being leading exporters of hydrogen to Northwest Europe. In fact, only 2% of projects in Spain and 12% in Portugal are targeting exports as their primary target sector. Projects may be targeting exports as a secondary target sector or in potential future phases of development. It seems that developers would prefer to have domestic off-takers due to the added cost of transportation and the lack of progress overall on hydrogen transport infrastructure. Furthermore, Spain and Portugal have explicit targets in their hydrogen strategies for the use of renewably produced hydrogen in industry by 2030. For Spain, 74% of all hydrogen used in industry by 2030 should be renewable, and with Portugal, the target is that 5% of all energy consumption in industry should come from renewable hydrogen. Next slide, please. Here we can see two positive case studies of projects that have both taken FID. One in Spain, the High-Val project being jointly developed by BP and Iberdrola, and the only large-scale project to have taken FID in Portugal, Galp's H2 Park near their refinery in Sines. As we can expect from the previous slide, both these projects are targeting industrial decarbonisation through replacing grey hydrogen demand at their respective refineries. Firstly, the Galp project is aiming to be a 600 megawatt electrolyzer project with the first phase of 100 megawatts reaching FID in September 2023. So Galp's refinery in Sines is Portugal's only major refinery in the country and represents 85% of the country's current grey hydrogen demand. Phase 1 is expected to replace 20% of Galp's grey hydrogen production, saving 110,000 kilotons per annum of CO2 emissions. With the High-Val project at BP's refinery in Castellón in Spain, this reached FID earlier this month, as you may have seen. When the project was originally announced, it was to be a 2 gigawatt project to replace grey hydrogen at the refinery and also to produce biofuels, with the majority of this capacity online by 2030. However, BP and Iberdrola, in a 50-50 joint venture, have decided to only move forward with 25 megawatts, which is set to come online in 2026. This 25 megawatts will be provided by Plug Power. So as we can see in the diagrams, both these projects score very highly. This is due to beneficial locations at refineries where they can benefit from an existing infrastructure. They're both replacing existing grey hydrogen, so Galp and BP will serve as the off-takers for their respective projects. They have secured renewable energy supply. In the case of BP, they're jointly developing it with Iberdrola, and both projects have secured an electrolyzer. However, as you may recall, the majority of projects in Iberia are struggling, and Jörn will expand on the reasons for the main reasons for that now.
Thanks, Arthur. So as we saw on the previous slide, there are two promising examples of progress in both Portugal and Spain. However, despite these select advancements, it's important to recognize, as stated by Arthur just now, that the overall project pipeline in Iberia remains immature. So despite the strong ambitions and clear advantages both countries possess, you can see that 70% of Iberian hydrogen projects still lack offtake agreements and 67% face uncertainty around electrolyzer technology. Now, these are critical components of an interconnected value chain where each element plays a pivotal role in moving a project forward to FID. So mirroring how we score projects in our project certainty assessment, for a project to be considered viable, several key factors must be in place as illustrated on this slide. You, of course, need a credible developer overseeing and developing the project. You need to secure power agreements, a reliable water source, grid connectivity, to name a few. Electrolyzer technology, which is fundamental to renewable hydrogen production, of course, but also be secured with a purchase order. Finally, the hydrogen produced needs infrastructure to transport the volumes to a reliable offtaker backed by a long-term offtake agreement. Now, offtake agreements are particularly crucial as they ensure a long-term revenue stream, providing the financial security developers need to secure project financing from investors such as banks. The lack of progress in electrolyzer technology for a majority of projects further emphasizes the immaturity of many Iberian projects. So while these challenges explain why many projects are rated as risked or possible, as you saw in terms of reaching FID based on our project certainty assessment, it's important to note that the slow pace of key enabling elements, such as government support, country support, and infrastructure development, is hindering progress not only in Iberia, but across Europe as a whole. So why is government support so important? Well, targets, which we've seen in Spain and Portugal, that they clearly have, and demand-side regulations that the EU has set provide clear guidance for developers and off-takers alike, helping them make informed and targeted decisions about their long-term strategies. But what we are focused on here is government support in the form of subsidies. These are essential for enabling projects to move forward as they help de-risk investments and underwrite projects that provide the financial security, as I said, that banks and other private investors need to provide project financing. However, funding remains a continued issue for Spain. The government already faced criticism for a 2-year delay in funding, which led major developers like Iberdrola and Repsol to scale back their renewable hydrogen targets. Iberdrola, for example, reduced its ambitions in March, and the FID taken for its Highval project, as you saw, as Arthur mentioned, with BP was scaled back from a planned first phase 200 megawatt electrolysis capacity to just 25, to just 25 megawatts. In July, the government finally announced the 800 million euros in funding to support 7 projects. However, the exclusion of Iberdrola's 560 megawatt Palos de la Frontera project in Huelva sparked additional controversy. So although this project scored highly in our project certainty assessment, as you can see on the slide, it has been unable to progress without the promised funding. Jorge Paradella, Andalusia's regional minister for industry, energy and mining, raised concerns in a letter to Vice President Teresa Ribera in July, questioning the government's decision. We even saw last month deputies from Huelva's Popular Party seeking clarification on the funding criteria, arguing that the most cost-efficient projects should have been prioritized. Now, the government did cite a lack of project maturity as the reason for the exclusion, but the earlier mentioned 2-year delay may in fact have hindered key development processes for the project, including securing offtake agreements. In Portugal, So their domestic funding mechanisms have recently gained EU approval, but awards are not expected until the end of 2025. This poses a significant risk, as around 97% of Portugal's project pipeline capacity is still in early development stages. With only 13 projects in the pipeline, even a small number of cancellations could severely impact Portugal's ability to meet its hydrogen production targets. This underscores the urgent need for further project development supported by subsidies to ensure greater certainty and progress toward its production capacity goals. Finally, looking at infrastructure, the timely development of hydrogen infrastructure is critical not only for Spain and Portugal's domestic goals, but also for the broader European hydrogen market. So let's take a look at a few of the major projects in progress. Starting with H2Med in light blue. This is an international initiative to connect Iberia hydrogen network to Northwest Europe, enabling the supply of renewable hydrogen. This was launched in October 2022, and H2Med consists of two key pipelines. So you can see one bordering Portugal and Spain. So it's called CELSA, connecting the Portuguese hydrogen backbone to the Spanish backbone. You also have Barmar, linking an offshore pipeline linking the Spanish network with from Barcelona to Sasamura, France's industrial hub in Marseille. In June, a joint developer agreement was signed by Enagás, Geotigas, and Terega to advance the Barmar pipeline, with feasibility studies set to conclude by 2025 and operations expected by 2030. Recently, H2Med was included in the European Commission's sixth project, which was included in Europe's Commission's sixth project of common interest list, and the Spanish government provisionally approved Enagás to develop the pipeline network and two large-scale storage facilities, enhancing connections with both Portugal and France. So there are also opportunities in just the bottom of this map here for African hydrogen. So Spain could play a key role in importing electrolytic hydrogen from Africa, particularly North Africa, which is known for its rich wind and solar resources. Spain has already committed up to 200 million euros over 5 years to support hydrogen projects in Mauritania, for example, positioning itself as a gateway for African hydrogen into Europe. However, infrastructure challenges remain. So an offshore pipeline from Morocco to Spain is not expected until the 2040s, aligning with the timeline from Morocco's 5,600-kilometer hydrogen pipeline from Nigeria to Morocco as well. Moving to the Spanish hydrogen backbone, so Enagás plans to apply for subsidies through the CFE program to fund development studies in the second half of 2024. Yet to be seen, and a second application for construction funding is expected by 2026. Looking to Portugal, so their National Energy and Climate Plan focuses on phasing out natural gas in favor of renewable gases like hydrogen. REN, Portugal's gas and electricity network operator, is working to ensure the network can handle a 10 to 15% hydrogen injection by 2030. In June, Portugal launched its first tender for blending electrolytic hydrogen and biomethane into the gas network, with the potential to support up to 120 gigawatt hours, which is around 32 megawatts lower heating value of hydrogen. The results, though, have been delayed due to extended deadlines. So while Spain and Portugal make progress, the broader European network faces delays. Germany's proposed 9,700-kilometer hydrogen pipeline network has been delayed until 2037, although initial volumes are expected at some point next year. France's ability to connect Iberia to Northwest Europe and Germany also depends on the development of which is a south to north running pipeline along the east coast of France. It's being developed by GRT Gas and is scheduled for commissioning in 2030. Now, all of these timelines are fairly tight. There's some uncertainty in terms of progress, in terms of funding. So due to these ongoing uncertainties in network development, Iberian developers are exploring derivatives like ammonia for near-term exports to Rotterdam and other Northwest European ports. The port of Sines, for example, in Portugal, is set to become a hydrogen export hub by 2025, with Madocqua leading the development of export facilities as part of its Sines project. In Spain, they are working on export facilities in key industrial areas such as Huelva and regions in the north as well. However, due to, as Arthur mentioned, higher development and transport costs associated with export via ship, developers are prioritizing local demand before scaling to exports. So as we conclude, there's some key points that summarize the Iberian hydrogen landscape, starting with the fact that Spain and Portugal are well positioned. Both countries have strong hydrogen targets, strong, abundant renewable energy potential, and strong targets supporting that growth as well, and benefit from low electricity prices. So this does put them in a prime position to lead in Europe's renewable hydrogen market. However, for Iberia, this advantage clearly hasn't been enough as Spain and Portugal share comparable immaturity in project development. So despite a robust pipeline of projects, the level of project maturity in Spain and Portugal is comparable to other European markets. So many projects still face developmental challenges, particularly in securing key elements, as we mentioned, like offtake agreements and uncertainty around electrolyzer technology as well. The focus for now is on decarbonizing industry as a priority. So Spain and Portugal are concentrating on using hydrogen for industrial decarbonization before fully leveraging export opportunities. So this strategic focus ensures that local industries benefit from the transition before scaling up to meet external demand. Progress has definitely been slowed by delays in funding, as we've seen, and infrastructure gaps. Challenges like delays in funding, so securing long-term offtake agreements, addressing infrastructure gaps. So these gaps are holding back the potential, or the full potential, I should say, of these projects. And these barriers really must be resolved to accelerate development. And finally, accelerated government support and infrastructure are crucial. So to truly unlock the potential of Iberia's hydrogen sector, both Spain and Portugal need to accelerate that support, develop reliable infrastructure, and overcome the current project development hurdles. And only then can they fully realize their ambitions in hydrogen production and future export opportunities as well. So that concludes our content section of this webinar. I believe there's going to be a short poll posted shortly, but if you would like to stay for a demonstration after we do a brief Q&A session. Just having Gareth join us here to help moderate some of the Q&A, some of the questions that have been coming through.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, we'll leave that poll up for just the next minute. And then I've got I can see some questions coming through that I'll put to yourself and Arthur. Just while I'm doing that, just popping your email address in the webinar chat for everybody. So if you don't want to ask any questions right now, you can go direct to Jim, or indeed that will come through to the team as well. That's up. I'll leave that poll running just for a second. It's just giving an idea of who'd like to stay on at the end of the session. But looking down the list, just a couple of questions to start off with. Arthur, two for you. First of all, what do you see as the key enabling factors for projects in Spain? And I'll come back to you for the second one.
Yeah, key enabling factors for projects in Spain. I think obviously large-scale infrastructure development, like H2Med and the Spanish hydrogen backbone. And as Jun was explaining in the slides, enabling offtake agreements for these projects, as well as obviously the Spain and Portugal's advantage of large scale and cheap renewable electricity prices.
Good stuff. Staying with you, second part here. Why is proximity to off-takers so important for projects?
Yeah, so obviously, as I explained in the slides, many of these projects are being developed in industrial clusters where they are close to existing grey demand and industrial developers and customers. With those off-takers being close by, there's increased confidence in the offtake. It reduces excessive infrastructure requirements, such as long pipelines, and not having to transport hydrogen over greater distances keeps the price down. Furthermore, hydrogen won't be able to be transported over long distances, particularly in Spain and Portugal, until projects such as the Spanish hydrogen backbone are implemented.
Great, thanks, Arthur. I realise my lights have just gone out in the room. One that's just come in, Jen, I think we'll come to you on this. Any comments on green hydrogen costs versus market price of grey hydrogen?
Yep. Obviously, I think, we could spend, a whole webinar discussing this topic, as it's, pretty important in terms of understanding what the future development of the hydrogen or the renewable hydrogen market looks like. I think if I shorten it to a relatively succinct answer, it seems as though green hydrogen costs are going to remain significantly higher than the market price of grey hydrogen for some time. I think from developers that we've spoken to, obviously the range that they are able to achieve varies quite a lot, depending as things are quite project specific in terms of what they can agree for their power purchase agreements, what they can agree for offtake agreements, what kind of industry they're located in, and the infrastructure in place, and the scale of projects, of course. But what we're seeing is that certainly it's on the order of at a minimum 3 to 4 times that of grey hydrogen right now. So, I think you see, based on what we saw with the first pilot auction of the European Hydrogen Bank, you could say that, our Iberian projects, far more advantage in getting a lower green hydrogen cost compared to its other European counterparts. It seemed to indicate potentially that that's what they're able to do, although a significant premium will definitely be absorbed by off-takers. So I think, generally speaking, there's also a massive focus for green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen developers on cost reduction to minimize this gap and to try and close this gap down. And that is driven by things like reducing EPC costs, reducing all of the costs associated with all of the studies in place, all the environmental impact assessments, the time it takes to develop projects through, even to get government funding. So I think that's what we're seeing today.
Great, thanks, Jim. I think we've got time for 2 more questions. So I'm going to stay with you. So looking at some potential questions. So this one's come through. It said, what is the natural hydrogen potential in Iberia?
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting one. I think natural hydrogen, there's been some excitement as of late, I guess particularly with some smaller startup type companies, definitely smaller scale um, drilling companies. In Spain in particular, there was the Helios project. Sorry, not project. Helios Aragon. You had companies in Finland in Blue Jay Mining. Companies in Canada find potential resources of natural hydrogen. Um, and you know, I think what we'll say is that for natural hydrogen, there are certainly some notable advantages, which is kind of driving, I think, a lot of the excitement in the fact that potentially very low cost. Um, there's no cost of installing renewable capacity in addition to it, for instance, but there are a number of challenges as well, which is why it still remains a considerably nascent opportunity. So obviously, things like it's an unproven resource. What we've seen so far are kind of indications of what the possibilities could be. There's an obvious challenge presented when considering the transportation of that natural hydrogen. So you have pipelines, storage. Obviously, in order for it to make sense, you have to have the demand centers quite close to where you're producing that natural hydrogen. And the last point is really around regulation and policy. It's not just renewable hydrogen that's kind of needs that support. Natural hydrogen also will require that for it to take off as well. So without funding and policy in place, it's really hard to get commercial um, unproven technologies or opportunities off the ground.
Great, thanks, Jim. I think the last one can probably stay with you um, as well, but we've got time for it. I've got about 60 seconds to ask and answer. How can the Madaka project commercialize when hydrogen bank funding doesn't allow layering of additional funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point that we saw from the European Hydrogen Bank first auction. I think a question to be raised there is, how much does it help? Obviously, if those developers were able to uh, design something that's economically viable with such low subsidy support, they must have reduced costs elsewhere, or more likely that extra cost is going to be absorbed by the off taker. And I think that's where we see potentially how these demand side regulations are working. We have EU level mandates. We saw pretty significant country level targets for industrial, renewable hydrogen use in industry. And I think that's potentially pushing these off-takers to have to absorb these premiums and then allow projects like the Metaqual project to proceed and work towards FID because of it. But it's certainly interesting. And I'd be curious to see what happens in the second European Hydrogen Bank auction as well. I know they've a bit of a lower ceiling. They need to secure more offtake agreements than the first round, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see if that mechanism is really going to support the development, or going to continue to focus on sort of select projects. So something to watch towards as we go towards the end of the year for sure.
That's great. Thanks very much to you both for taking those questions. If we haven't got to your question, we will follow up with you afterwards. And if it's an anonymous question you posted, you have Jim's email address in the web chat that you can come to. Jim, I think this is the point where I say goodbye again. And you're going to go through a bit more detail around what's available in the hydrogen platform and indeed other services.
Thanks, Karen.